Hey Unwrappers, if you enjoy this podcast's approach to the news, then you will love The Week magazine. Curated from a diverse range of independent sources, The Week magazine delivers a refreshingly open-minded view of current affairs. And now, for a limited time, you can enjoy 6 free issues and then save an extra 10% on a print and digital subscription. Simply enter the offer code SUMMER23 at theweek.co.uk/offer to claim your free trial today. That's the code SUMMER23 at theweek.co.uk/offer. It's the week ending Saturday the 15th of July, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Hugh Edwards named as the BBC presenter accused of inappropriate sexual behaviour, mortgage rates soaring to their highest level for 15 years, and a handwritten document discovered in Aretha Franklin's sofa ruled as a valid will for her multi-million-dollar estate. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team is Sorcha Bradley, plus we have the boss man, Holden Frith, and from Money Week, Mr. Guy Anker. Guy, when is your mortgage up for renewal?
I've got another year to go, so I can just kind of not worry about it for a few months and then start worrying about it a bit later on.
Well, let's hope you're still laughing in a year's time. Guy, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is AI going to become the new home for scams?
Elon Musk presented his new project, in which he has already invested more than $3 billion. Musk's new project opens up great investment opportunities for British citizens. No project has ever given such opportunities to residents of the country.
The distinctive Mancunian tones, Guy, of your former boss, money-saving experts Martin Lewis. Or is it? It isn't.
Somewhere it's him, but unfortunately what's happened here is criminal scammers, just name them what they are, have used artificial intelligence to generate a video which appears to show him endorsing a fake investment project from Elon Musk, when, of course, he said nothing of the sort. And it's really brought into question how dangerous might AI become in this horrendous world of scams that, unfortunately, so many people are falling victims to.
And this came to light this week, didn't it? Because Martin Lewis himself tweeted the video and said, look at this scam. It's the first one I've become aware of. But just that language sort of tells you there's every chance, if you're a public figure, this kind of stuff is circulating already without your knowledge.
Quite possibly. Of course, he has the platform to, in this case, very much do the right thing and circulate it, because it's vital people know it's not him. You know, people that know him will know it's not him, because the little distinctive like pauses and, you know, you can hear the computer-generated voice, but I'm in the 0.01% of people that actually hear him on a day, or used to hear him on a daily basis. Most people won't know that. And you look across the market and the likes of Richard Branson, Alan Sugar, you know, you could go on and on and on. Big names that where their brand, their names, their so-called voices have been used by scammers, often in the investment market, in investment worlds, to trick people into parting with their money. And you do wonder whether they will start now to resort to videos and voice. It always used to be pictures and fake BBC, Guardian, Mirror articles. Nothing to do with the BBC, the Guardian, the Mirror, of course, but that's what the scammers used to do.
Sorcha, do you think you'd fall for this?
You know, I think the problem is that when you look at these videos, there is still an uncanny valley effect, I think, with a lot of them. You know, there's weird pauses, people's faces just look slightly strange and off. And I think, you know, once you've seen a few, in general, you can sort of tell. But the problem is that you have to look really carefully still. And, you know, when you're, you know, scrolling online, you're not giving things your full attention really generally. And I think that's where the problem sort of starts. And of course, we're still only at the very beginning of this sort of technology. And it's already so good. Even in 6 months, 18 months, 5 years, it's actually terrifying to think how convincing these sort of AI deepfakes could become.
Yeah, because I first saw the video myself on a big desktop computer screen, and I thought, well, this doesn't look anything like Martin Lewis. I mean, this is just obviously, you know, a fake. But you've got to imagine yourself maybe outside on a mobile phone, as you say, scrolling through social media. And Holden, what the scamsters have done as well, which is quite clever, is they've used the background that he uses when he's contributing to Good Morning Britain. So it looks like a piece of punditry. People know Martin Lewis doesn't do adverts for third-party services, but this looks like he was asked his opinion on a TV show, and the background is very convincing because it's real.
Yeah, I saw this, in fact, on a small screen on my phone. I'm less familiar with Martin Lewis himself, so I don't think the technical construction of it is what would have given it away to me. I think what made it more obvious as a scam is the content, talking about the multi-million-pound investment opportunity. But I think where AI gets really frightening is the way it can be used to personalize these kinds of scams much more easily and perhaps make them more subtle and more believable. And, you mentioned mortgage rates. If, as Guy was in the process of looking for a new mortgage, something popped up with Martin Lewis saying, not here's a mortgage for 0.5%, but here's a mortgage for 3.5%, or, just sort of something that had scraped information perhaps from this very podcast and worked out that exactly when Guy will be looking for a new mortgage and looking at the market and just shaving off 0.5% and then using that to fish for information. That's where AI can make that kind of personalization much more efficient, much more effective, and sort of lure in people to much more believable kind of scams.
Yeah, and I suppose, Sorcha, ultra personal as well. I mean, it's one thing talking about a celebrity talking to you, if you like, because someone's manipulated what they're going to say, customized for you, but they could be using one of your friends. We're not so far away from a world where they've worked out what your mum sounds like through Facebook video, and they're manipulating her voice saying, Sorcha, can you lend me £100? I'm stuck outside the house.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think I saw an ITV report where something much more terrifying had happened, where these scammers, criminals had got someone's daughter's voice and then claimed that they had kidnapped this poor woman's daughter, and was basically, kind of holding her for ransom and asking her for money. So, yeah, I think the possibilities are, of how this technology, how algorithmic technology, how sort of artificial intelligence and, all those things along in that space of technology can be used to, defraud people and scam people. The potential for it is terrifying.
And it's easy to use, Holden, isn't it? And that's the thing. People can create this stuff on their computers at home, probably on their phones.
Yes, that one of the big game changers really of AI is that it gives people cheap, easy access to a suite of tools, really. And those tools can be used for business purposes, for creating legitimate software, but they can also allow people who don't have the technical capabilities to produce either the software that's used to distribute spam or create phishing attacks, or the sorts of deepfake audio, video, voice construction we've been talking about. And it means that it lowers the barrier of entry to this kind of attack, and also, perhaps not quite yet, but I think it's coming, it allows much more of a kind of feedback loop and a learning process for the scammers. So they can see exactly what sort of language, what sort of offers are bringing in, from their perspective, the best results, and optimize to that. And so you will see these sorts of videos and emails getting much more convincing, much harder to spot for the people who are receiving them. I do wonder, though, whether there is, on the other side of this, the arms race that these sorts of scams inevitably are, if there won't be a benefit to the detection that will come from AI. And what at the moment depends on somebody like Martin Lewis seeing that his image is being used and abused and flagging it, and then the platforms sometimes quite slowly taking down not only the original image, but all of the copycat versions of it that go up. If you can train AI to spot those and to spot similar sorts of offer and to learn what kind of tactics are being used, that could then allow for a more proactive takedown as well.
I mean, Martin Lewis, Guy, would like the publishers to be much more proactive about this. And that's what he said in his tweet, isn't it? Quote, government and regulators must step up to stop big tech publishing such dangerous fakes. People will lose money and it'll ruin lives. Do you think that's right? This is the responsibility of the likes of Meta to say, we're going to stop people paying us to place this kind of advert on people's feed when it's clearly criminality?
100%. It's going to be difficult at the start, and we're at the start now, to really know how to police this. We're all learning. I mean, this was quite a moment, Martin, putting this out, because it's the first one, certainly the first one I've seen of this nature, the manipulation of a celebrity's voice via AI to try to scam people in this particular way. We're going to see more. As has already been said, they're going to get better. But I think for now, Holden's right. I think hopefully AI will get to a point where we can actually almost use AI as part of the policing. But we don't have that, I don't think, just yet, unless there's more clever people than me that know how to do that. But certainly when these are flagged to the social media giants and others, they have to be taken down immediately. Absolutely have to.
And they'd say that they will take them down immediately. I mean, I'm sure in reality the process is much slower than that, but they'd say that their terms and conditions say that they will. But should it be even earlier than that? I mean, this is sort of obvious, isn't it? Because when you post an ad on a social network, and we don't know which one this was actually that was sent to him, but when you post any ad, it goes through a process, doesn't it? A person looks at it and says whether it's appropriate or not.
There's not always a human being. There's a lot of algorithmic ads out there. And listen, on the one hand, to be fair to the social media giants, the way they operate, the scale that they operate, it's not probably going to be realistic to have a human being spending a significant amount of time on every single ad. But absolutely, when it's flagged, they just have to come down. And, I've worked on scams in the past. Sorry, worked on
them, I presume.
worked on helping to remove scams. To just be really clear here, and I've witnessed how slow some organisations have been to remove adverts that are clearly basically just a scam, and they have to get better at this, because there are reporting mechanisms, and they need to make sure that they have the staff there to read the reports, to watch the reports, listen to reports, whatever it is, and take immediate action. If you're not sure, take it down anyway while we wait. It's better not to have people lose hundreds of £1,000s in the meantime than to upset an advertiser for 5 minutes.
I mean, what's really clear here, Sorcha, is that the scammers in this particular instance are not scared of what might happen to them. I mean, the chutzpah of using Martin Lewis, of all people, to front their scam is extraordinary. He is the person who sued Facebook for defamation at the High Court. I mean, they settled, but they settled. You know that if you use his image, you're asking for trouble. And yet they've chosen him, of all people. The cojones of it is just like, yeah, we don't care. We don't think we're going to get caught out by this.
Yeah, I think there's a number of sort of reasons behind that. I think, firstly, obviously, these adverts have been seen mostly on Facebook. But, if we look at Twitter, where lots of these sort of scams will start appearing, it's really far from clear if Elon Musk and the people who are running Twitter have the capability any longer, or the will, to sort of ensure that the site is safe, that the content on there is trusted. I mean, they've removed many of the safeguarding features around that. And so I think that, again, shows sort of a need for greater government input and regulation, because we can't rely on these companies to, actually police these things properly. And two, I think, if you look at the online safety bill and sort of the slowness of that coming through in the UK and sort of how watered down it's been, I think although, the UK government and our parliamentarians are trying to get to grips with these sort of emerging new harms, I think they're finding it very difficult too, and they're being very slow on sort of getting to grips on what actually needs to be sort of legislated for and what kind of protections need to be put in place. So I don't think the online safety bill really at all tries to tackle the problem of deepfake AI technology in any significant terms, apart from maybe around deepfake porn. But other than that, it doesn't seem to really have it hasn't got to grips with it all, from what I can tell. So that's another huge issue, I think. It's how the slowness of the government's response and how it can respond.
Yeah, what is that tardiness about, actually, Holden? Because we have had a Conservative government the whole way through, so there hasn't been a change in that sense. The Online Harms White Paper was 4 years ago, to the extent that it was regulating the stuff it was regulating, never mind this new kind of thing. Why is it taking so long to get through? They can't blame the EU anymore either.
I think that's a reflection of just how difficult this is to legislate. And the Online Harms Bill is one of those pieces of legislation where there isn't really a partisan divide about it. And you can read one article which seems utterly convinced that it's a good thing and it must be implemented as soon as possible. And by the end of it, I'm convinced by that. And then I'll read another article which is absolutely against it. And I'm equally convinced at the end of that it should be significantly changed. And the problem is, well, there's two problems. One is legislating for an international problem from a domestic purpose and trying to create laws that actually can be implemented in a significant way and can actually address the problem they're trying to address. That's a real challenge. The other is, even if you assume you could do that, where do you place the dividing line between free speech, free expression, free trade and business, and free exchange of ideas, and then control? And in some cases, talking about scams, that's relatively easy. But the problem is you need laws that apply not only to scams, but to all internet expression. And so it just gets tied up in those sorts of big philosophical questions.
And just finally on this, Guy, from a kind of consumer point of view, with your Money Week hat on, what is your advice regarding where people should seek advice? It obviously isn't through ads on social networks, even if they haven't been faked. Where should you be looking for financial advice?
You should be looking for financial advice through independent financial advisors in the simplest terms, or anyone that you know and trust on the matter, or at a more a reading level. Reading the likes of Money Week, the likes of Money Saving Expert, the likes of the Times Money section, and so on and so forth. So I think we should all treat anything we see on social media or even online in general as a fake until we've had those few seconds just to digest it. Look, if it's come from Money Week, if it's come from Money Saving Expert, it's come from the Times, it's come from the Telegraph, it's fine, of course. But I mean, if it's come from a source that you just don't know about, just assume it's a fake. The other day, my wife had a text from the Royal Mail. It wasn't the Royal Mail, by the way, saying, Guy, is this right? They want 79p for this or that. I went, Sarah, it's almost certainly a fake. Yes, it's a fake. Instant response was just assume it's a fake and then look into it a bit further. And it's not nice to say because we want to enjoy scrolling through Twitter or Instagram or whatever we do, but there is so much rubbish out there, and rubbish is being polite. We have to have our wits about us.
Yeah. And also, of course, on social networks, it can create the impression it's endorsed by your friends, can't it? So then it feels like a reliable source, even if you don't know what it is. Okay, that's enough of that. Holden, you're up next after this. Okay, Holden, what do you think this week should be remembered for?
Are the gates of history now ticket only?
The best preserved Roman temple. The most impressive product of Roman engineering. Arguably, the most influential building of all time. As a monument, and as a relic of antiquity, the Pantheon stands alone. Unlike so many great buildings, the Pantheon is easily accessible. The doors are almost always open, and tourists stream steadily over the marble floor, gaping at the famous dome. Most visitors stay only a few minutes, and even those who come armed with guidebooks and the best of intentions often leave the building with only a vague idea of the Pantheon's history and significance.
Now everything just sounds like AI-generated voice to me. A historical tour of Rome's Pantheon there, a 2021 video from the YouTube channel Told in Stone. Holden, what's the story?
The story is that video is now out of date, even though the subject of it, the Pantheon, has been unchanged, largely since it was built 2,000 years ago. What's changed about it this week is that you now have to queue and pay to get through the doors. There's no more milling in and out as the video suggested. And while the €5 ticket price may be modest, and while it may be more surprising that it used to be free than that it isn't anymore, it does seem to have touched a nerve in Rome and beyond.
Why? Just culturally, do you think, because they're used to the idea that, it was one of the free sites of their city, or is it something deeper than that?
I think there's two categories of debate around it. Part of it is philosophical, which may be appropriate, and part of it is more practical, just because of the specific way the fee has been implemented. That's led to a lot of confusion and has given ticket touts and opportunistic tour guides a chance to take advantage.
Okay, tell us how the fee's been implemented, and then we'll get onto the philosophy later.
Yeah, so there's you can buy tickets in advance online. You can also queue up and get them at the site, but there are different queues depending on whether you have already booked a ticket, whether you want to buy a ticket, whether you have booked a tour. Some people have also booked tours that don't include tickets to get in, so they then need to buy an additional ticket. And some tour guides have bought up a lot of tickets in advance and then are selling them at a markup with an audio guide or a live guide. So it's just led to profiteering and confusion.
Yeah, so that's the concern that I'd seen mostly, Sorcha. There was a piece in the New York Times about this, not even saying what had happened yet at the Pantheon, but comparing it to the Colosseum and saying what the situation is there. And apparently at the Colosseum, tickets are bought in bulk by legitimate tour companies because ticket touting is illegal in Italy. But the legitimate tour companies, because ticket touting is illegal in Italy, can't just resell the tickets. So they have to create a package which will cost 5 or 10 times more than what it would cost to go around the Colosseum. And the fear is that will just happen here again. Everyone's going to rack up the fees and they're not getting what they're paid for.
Yeah, and I think if I was a tourist in Rome, it wouldn't be a particularly nice feeling to know that while once upon a time I could have entered for free and now it's €5, but actually I'm being sold this tour at a huge markup, which still includes, the cost of entry. So I think in that regard, in terms of tourism for the city and for the country, I don't know if it's particularly good route to go down, just because clearly, as we've seen in the Colosseum, there are so many problems with being able to access these tickets in the first place, and then them being sold at a huge markup. And I think if that is replicated in other tourist sites in the city, then I think you just start to feel like you're being sort of, I don't want to say scammed, but slightly ripped off at kind of every place that you go to, especially when loads of these places are huge sort of cultural gems that I think instinctively we feel sort of belong, to everyone. And should be accessible to everyone. And I think especially if you live in those cities, sort of, there's already problems with accessing these sites that Romans walk past every day, and kind of this seems like this is another barrier to sort of accessing their cultural heritage and sort of allowing other people to access the brilliant, amazing cultural heritage that there is in the city. So yeah, I don't think it's a particularly good route to go down personally.
Yeah, the accessibility point is interesting, isn't it, Guy? Because I suppose any tourist that's made their way to Rome can probably shell out €5 to get into the Pantheon, because that's probably half what a coffee would cost outside. But at the same time, what about those older tourists who maybe don't have a smartphone in their pocket and it's all moving digital? What about the cost of roaming to get your smartphone connected to a network at all?
And what if your battery runs out on your smartphone as well? I mean, there are so many things. I've got two hats on this one. My consumer hat says, as I think someone's already alluded to, these are sites that we must feel that we have a right. They're part of our heritage. Our being the human race, obviously. I'm not Italian, but you know what I mean. And things that used to be free 20, 30, 40 years ago in so many guises now start charging, and it's sad. That's my sort of consumer hat. My practical hat, though, also says these structures and buildings have to be maintained. And we've seen, Windsor Castle in the 90s. We've seen Notre Dame not long ago. It's very sadly go up in flames. And listen, I don't know the ins and outs of those particular incidents, but you obviously, if you're running these huge sites, you have to invest, especially as they get older, in ensuring their structural integrity and what have you. Now, I'm sure in some cases, I'm not suggesting specifically in this case, but I'm sure in some cases, chief executives of organisations that do charge also want to, top up those costs and make some profit. Which, look, there's nothing wrong with profit, of course, but I go back to my consumer hat. That's why it's sad. And as you say, Ollie, there are the practicalities of having to do things on smartphones as well. And we're seeing that even in areas where you're used to buying tickets, whether it's sporting events or the theatre or concerts, having to use a smartphone. Some people love it. Some people worry, as you do. What if the battery goes? What if I don't have a smartphone? What if I can't get reception, etc.?
But it is mostly tourists who go, isn't it, Holden? And I understand if you're Italian, this feels like your cultural heritage and you used to be able to go in for free. But equally, if you're Italian, I mean, rather than your taxes going on preserving this building that mostly tourists go and see, this way the tourists who are coming are paying for its maintenance.
Yeah, and citizens of Rome do have free entry. They don't need to pay. I personally don't have a problem with with charging per se. I think, especially if it is a relatively low amount like this, €5 per person. The Italian Culture Ministry says it's been raising around €40,000 a day. 70% of that will go towards maintaining the building. It does seem that, given the amount of money that tourists will spend on the trip as a whole, it's only right that some of these places benefit. I know Venice has had a particular problem with this sort of concept of tourism, specifically because it has a lot of cruise ships arriving. They don't stay, tourists on cruise ships don't stay for the night. They don't benefit the hotel economy. They don't pay the tourist taxes that people who stay in hotels do pay. So they introduced a fee for day trippers into the city at the beginning of the year. I understand the sort of sense of sadness about closing off these kind of historical places, but I think if the ultimate result is that they are better maintained, that they last another 2,000 years, that more people see them in the longer term, then that is a price worth paying.
You did mention philosophy, Holden. What's the philosophical concern?
I think the philosophical concern is about putting a price on this sort of cultural experience and trying to decide if the Pantheon is worth €5 and the Colosseum is €20, then, does that mean the Pantheon is 1/4 of the value of the Colosseum? And I think it's the sense that actually those sorts of conversations are somehow unseemly, and in a country which thinks of itself as one of the founts of Western civilization, the sense that it should be open to all and should be drawing in people who can be inspired and educated about that is a value in itself.
Sorcha, what's the most extortionate attraction you've ever been to?
I really think the Tower of London is just much too expensive. It's £33, which I
priceless.
think
Crown
is
jewel,
crazy.
Sorcha, literally the crown jewel.
I just think that's a crazy price. I mean, I'm not saying it's amazing when you're inside. Obviously, the crown jewels, so much history, it's spectacular. It just seems an extortionate amount of money. And if you're going with a family, there's 4 of you, it's over £100. It does sort of remove the spontaneity of, and that's part of living in London.
Any international listeners, please do not avoid the Tower of London because of Sorcha's insane rally.
It is great, but it is expensive.
Guy, most extortionate attraction you've ever been to?
My wife and I were in Vegas a few years ago. We went to the Venetian Hotel. We thought we'd ride a gondola.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't actually remember the exact price, but it was expensive. And I've just
that's because they give you a free cocktail first.
We didn't get anything free, but it's currently $34 per person on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, $39 on other days. That's a lot of money for a pretty rubbish ride, to be honest. If you're going to Vegas, don't go on a gondola in Venetian. It ain't Venice.
You can walk around a shopping mall. Holden?
I would say far worse than the Tower of London, but equally parochial, is the Shard. The tallest observation deck in London, but it's too tall. It's so high you can't really see very much of what is still mostly a fairly low-rise city. And I think that's about £32, about the same as the Tower of London. You're much better to go to the London Eye instead, because A, you move and you get different angles, but also it's still on a human scale. You can see what people are doing. You can see streets. You can see small buildings.
Hold on. I've done that and bought a drink at the bar at the top, and that was about £20 for the drink.
Oh, I thought you meant at the top of the London Eye. I was thinking, how do they get a bar up there? Okay, well, conclusion, London is expensive. Shocker. Sorcha, you're finishing the show after this. Okay, Sorcha, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Could a new city constructed out of wood soon have us all yelling timber?
Wood is a timeless material. It connects us to our tradition and our roots.
Wood is the natural choice in modern construction. It's renewable, it's local, It actively absorbs carbon dioxide. And for me as an architect, it leaves me with several design options.
The possibilities of wood. From YouTube channel Trasad. Apologies to any Swedes listening for my pronunciation there. Sorcha, what's the story?
Yes, so Swedish developers are getting ready to build the world's largest wooden city. I think city is a bit of a misnomer. It's really a large urban construction project, which will be built entirely in wood. And it is a £1.4 billion project, which will be built in Stockholm in Sweden. And it will feature 7,000 office spaces and 2,000 homes over 250,000 square meters.
Why wood?
Well, there's a big environmental case for building with wood or with mass timber. Firstly, building with wood has a lighter environmental footprint than using traditional materials like concrete or steel. So currently, the building and construction industry is responsible for about 40% of global emissions, according to the United Nations.
Wow. Actually just constructing buildings, not people then living in them.
It's also the energy use of people in those buildings, which is slightly confusing, because that 40% figure is quoted widely. As far as I could see, it's about 20% for construction alone, which is still huge.
Right, but you can't get rid of the bit where people are using the buildings, can you? That's going to come whatever the building's made of. Do you think there's going to be an environmental benefit here, Holden?
I do, yes, because I think even if you're reducing that 20% chunk, it's a big part of it, and that's the bit that's actually harder to do, because the energy use, as we shift towards renewable energy, domestic and commercial power consumption for things like lighting and heating can be eliminated quite easily. What's much harder to eliminate is the industrial uses of energy to make concrete. And cement production alone is responsible for something like 7% of the world's carbon emissions. So that's almost 4 times the footprint of aviation, which gets a lot more attention than something as mundane as making cement.
Something as necessary as buildings we need to live in, as opposed to your hobby of flying through the air pointlessly. Guy, there is a reason that people stop building cities out of wood.
Yeah, the Great Fire of London, I think, was one of them.
Yeah. Indeed. Museum of London, free entry to find out all about that one.
Yes, and obviously, there is the fire safety aspect. Let's be clear as well. We're not in 1666. We're in 2023, and standards are better. The construction companies put cavity barriers and fire stops and sprinkler systems and what have you. But it is the fire aspect of or the dangers. The fire dangers of building with wood are well known. Though I must say, Grenfell Tower wasn't the problem. It was the cladding as we did this when I was on a couple of months ago. We talked about the problem with construction in the UK and the number of buildings where the insulation was poor, that the cavity barriers weren't put in, and we're spending billions now on repairing hundreds of buildings. So while wood has a bad reputation from a fire safety aspect, because we can imagine wood going up, we've all done it ourselves at school, starting fires and how it works. And sorry, that made it sound like I used to go to school and start fires. I meant from an educational perspective.
Before your career in fraud, yeah.
We need to put it in context that there are other flammable materials, and if you construct buildings properly and you do things the right way, while you never eliminate risk, you will significantly bring the risk of having a fire down.
Okay, how are they going to do that, Sorcha? How is the wood safe and not flammable?
Essentially, it is sort of engineered wood, which is specifically designed for construction. And this sort of, although I have to admit, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but this engineered wood, basically, when it burns, it performs a protective char layer on the surface, which protects sort of the inner parts of the wood. And that means that much of, the structural strength of the timber is maintained. And so it is still, a safe material to use in construction.
Yeah, but I've seen that compared, Holden, to saying, it's like trying to set fire to a log. You'd need some kindling. And in the Great Fire of London, effectively, the buildings had bits of kindling in because they had bits of little wood in the way that they were constructed. But nonetheless, an arsonist could take a piece of kindling, couldn't they, and set fire to the log. That's the point, isn't it? We know it's flammable underneath it. And that's a terror threat as much as anything else, surely.
The tests that have been done have shown that when you're using this kind of engineered wood, it's no more dangerous than traditionally constructed buildings. That is partly because of the inherent sort of flame resistance that Sorcha was talking about, but also because if you are constructing timber buildings, you build in fire breaks and you ensure that they're constructed in a way that doesn't let flames spread through them. And it's worth pointing out that a lot of brick built houses and sort of low-rise buildings up to 4 or 5 stories, they are often timber framed and they're not engineered wood. They're simple planks of wood made from timber. So, and because the fire codes are often less stringent on brick built buildings and concrete buildings than they are on timber buildings. In this specific case of looking at the flammability of wood, there's a lot more effort put into making sure that timber buildings aren't going to collapse if fire spreads through them, because that's where you end up with a lot of casualties in a larger building, is if the structure itself can't hold. So any of these larger buildings built from engineered wood have to show that they will remain upright and remain structurally secure, even if they are subject to a kind of catastrophic fire.
The architects as well, Sorcha, claim that wood reduces stress. Were you surprised to see that?
I mean, I think maybe in Sweden there is definitely sort of they have
kinship.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that they've got more of a relationship with wood, and for use in saunas or skiing cabins, and they've got a lot of forests. I think they've got good associations with that material, as do we in the UK, I think, largely. And I think one of the benefits is that sort of the idea of using natural materials that we find sort of in the natural world can improve kind of our state of mind. Although I do think in a way it's slightly like architect jargon. I think one of the things you could feel good about wooden buildings is that these wood holds and absorbs a lot of carbon, and therefore it is a carbon trap and a carbon sink. And if you want to kind of improve your environmental credentials, then living in a wooden construction, that's maybe one of the ways you could do it.
Guy, do you think we're going to see wooden skyscrapers in London?
I can't see it somehow. I think the shininess of London's skyscrapers is probably going to live on. But I understand the point around de-stressing it. Sorcha, when you mentioned saunas, that made me think, because when you're in that environment, there is something about wood. Funnily enough, if you asked me that question a few years ago, I probably would have scoffed at it. But my wife's a reflexologist, and she tells me all about energies and what have you, and environments. And
your other half's getting a lot of shout-outs on today's show, I must say. I feel like we're all getting to know Sarah.
So I can see that, because I think your surroundings are important. And listen, just this is a personal opinion, I think wood tends to look nice. And things that look nice, I think, are more likely to make you less stressed and happier.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to urban design, Holden, we know that being around trees, even if buildings aren't made of wood, makes people feel better. Having a sense of the natural world is a cornerstone of future development, isn't it now? Why, for so many years, was that missed out, that important piece of the puzzle, making people feel like they're in a real place?
I think you can see when you look around building design, and particularly housing design around the world, that there's a really strong element of tradition and psychology to the sorts of materials we use. Like, wood panelled homes are very common in places like New England. Large parts of Northern Europe use timber in a very different way to what's being proposed here. But in England and Britain, brick built homes are seen as the norm, and I think it's sort of seen as almost necessary. Like, the idea of a wooden home feels somehow flimsier or inferior, less. Maybe it does go back to that Englishman's home is his castle kind of feeling. But what the sorts of timber buildings that are being discussed now are really different from those sorts of timber clad houses. They're using engineered wood in a structural way, and you can still have a kind of very shiny glass clad tower that is nevertheless built around a wooden frame. And because the wooden frame is so much lighter than a concrete core would be, you don't need the same kind of huge foundations, which again is tons and tons of poured cement. So you could choose to have a a very modern, shiny looking building with wood at its heart, if that's what you wanted, or as most of these developments do, because they want to make a virtue of the woodenness of them, you can have that more organic feeling to how the building presents itself.
I mean, as you alluded to earlier, Sorcha, this idea of a kind of mini city, 2,000 homes over 250,000 square meters, 7,000 office spaces, all entirely clad of wood, does feel very Swedish. Do you think this is something we're going to see across Europe?
You know, I do think, obviously, in a lot of places, it's going to take some convincing. I think particularly in the UK, in light of, I think people are very worried about what our homes and buildings are being made out of in light of the Grenfell disaster. I think, in the US as well, I think you could say in lots of places, it's wildfire risks. You're going to have to convince people that these buildings are safe. And I think these companies who are, constructing these wooden, cities, they've got a long way to go on that front. But I do think globally, we are really aware that we need to be reducing our carbon footprint. We need to be protecting the environment. And this appears to be, although there is still a lot of debate around it, this appears to be an important piece of the puzzle in reducing our environmental impact.
Also, if you live in a wooden house, then you wouldn't go to a log cabin on holiday, would you? Seems a shame. You'd want to escape to a concrete bunker somewhere.
That reduces your carbon impact from aviation as well. So it's a perfect virtuous circle.
Perfect.
It's a win for everybody. My thanks to Sorcha, Guy and Holden. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tap follow. You can also, by the way, get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.